Welcome back. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion. The British government has pledged to end the era of state-sponsored multiculturalism. The Community Secretary Eric Pickles has said people should celebrate what they have in common rather than what divides. He accused the previous Labour government of encouraging communities to live separate lives by strengthening their own cultures and community links rather than joining in with wider society. The new government proposal, entitled Creating the Conditions for Integration, said that despite Britain's tradition of tolerance, there's a growing concern over race relations. The paper says incoming migrants in some areas have shown themselves unable or unwilling to integrate. Joining me to discuss the future of multiculturalism is Dr. Varun Oberoi, a lecturer in the Department of Politics and History at Brunel University, Stephen Wolfe from the United Kingdom Independence Party, and Rob Barclay, the director of the Runnymede Trust, a race equality think tank. I'll begin with you, Rob. Was multiculturalism a bad idea?
I don't know if you've ever tried it, but I do think that we're a massively successful society. People come from a range of different backgrounds and contribute to the future of Britain. Suggesting that they should leave their cultures behind and somehow adopt a mythical British identity, I don't think is all that helpful.
You're shaking your head, Stephen. Stephen Wolfe from the United Kingdom Independence Party. What are your thoughts?
Well, actually, I was about to agree with Rob in that we should celebrate the range of different cultural identities of people and also of the various countries that they come from. But where I suddenly started shaking my head was where you start talking about adopting a mythical cultural Britain. I find that deeply offensive. For someone like myself, who is black, Jewish, Irish and English, born in Moss Side in Manchester, who's been able to adopt himself in this country, celebrating everything that we have through a solid education system set down by this country with the values that it has, I find that offensive to say we have no British culture. It's not mythical, it's real, and it's very real to me.
Dr. Oberoi.
Well, of course, Rob's right to say that in terms of Britain compared to, say, countries like Canada or Australia, we've never had an explicit policy of multiculturalism. Yet we've certainly had measures that are very similar, such as race relations legislation, legal exemptions for minority religious practices, multicultural education in schools, and so on. And of course, those practices are not in retreat, as it were. The government's not talking about removing any of those policies. Of course, some measures at the local level, like translation practices, have been scrapped. But of the major policies that have always comprised the British approach to multiculturalism, they aren't going anywhere. And I wonder perhaps whether or not the government's position is more one of rhetoric than substance. It's very, very difficult to distance ourselves from multiculturalism as an idea, as in a range of policies, or indeed multiculturalism as a multicultural society, as the UKIP representative just said. I mean, he endorses that idea, so do most mainstream politicians. It's very easy to criticise the word multiculturalism. The idea, however, I don't see a real distancing at all.
The government say they're concerned that multiculturalism has weakened our collective identity. How can we encourage multiculturalism and at the same time strengthen inter-community cohesion, Rob Barclay?
Well, I think that we do have an identity. Sorry if I made people think that when I refer to a mythical British identity, I'm not saying that we haven't got something special which is about Britain, but that something special is about our shared future together. People from all around the world have come and made their homes within the UK and are designing a kind of future which includes Asian heritage, African heritage, as well as white heritages, rather than trying to create a kind of culture which harks back to the 1940s and 1950s. We need to be focused on the future, and I think being focused on the future will be the solution to some of our disagreements currently. What is it that we can do better together than we have been able to do in the past?
Rob, you say focus on the future. Is there a future for multiculturalism, or is this approach going to be incredibly wrong and just increase tensions between communities?
I think the only future is multicultural. I think if we think about our societies and the interdependencies between nations and the interdependencies between people from different backgrounds, it's clear that if we have a different faith background, if we have a different historical heritage, our future looks brighter, because I believe that a range of diversity, a range of people from different backgrounds, creates something new and special, and something which is about now and not about some kind of historical vision of what it is to be British.
Dr. Oberoi from the Department of Politics and History at Brunel University, would you agree?
There's a lot in what Rob's saying that I agree with. I would say that for multiculturalists, both in terms of theorists of multiculturalism, but also in terms of practice, in terms of actual policies, going all the way back to the Canadian policy conceived in 1971, national identity has always been important. In this country, if you look at historical documents like the Swan Report in 1983, national identity was important. National identity has always been important to multiculturalism. The question is, what type of national identity? One imbued in British history, of course, we're not trying to get away from that. But that history can be conceived in lots of different ways. It can be conceived as being purely the product of Englishness, which would, of course, exclude the Scots and the Welsh. But it can also be conceived as being a multicultural history that has included several different groups who have helped to comprise what Britain is today and who will determine what Britain's future is. That sort of British identity is something that's inclusive, not exclusive, and that's the type of national identity that multiculturalists, both in theory and in practice, in terms of actual policies, have always advocated.
Do you think this is a helpful identity, Stephen, from the United Kingdom Independence Party?
Well, I think what the United Kingdom Independence Party does is actually celebrates the cultures of all countries, particularly if you take our European policy. We believe that every country in the European 27 and those who have to trade with us around the world are vibrant and important to each other. But what we also try to do, and what we have firm beliefs on, is that each individual country has special qualities. And what happens when you have this unifying aspect which multiculturalism seems to go to? It's this kind of mono theory, that if everybody joins up, we'll all be happy, clappy, wonderful, slapping each other's backs, we'll all be eating the same foods and joyous together, ignores the very important aspects about the individuality of human beings, which is vital, I think, to a vibrant economy, and human beings that join together in one. I listen to some of the arguments. Culture is a little bit deeper. It's about all humans are biological and need cultural attachments. And when one looks at our history, whether it's about the values that you have, whether it's the places that you eat, whether it's the religions that you have come back from a history that works itself together. So one can look at Britain looking at the Romans or looking at Egypt as being part of our cultural history. That has stemmed itself across all of Europe. Multiculturalism is trying to fathom on all the different cultures from different backgrounds together into one. Whilst I celebrate their differences, I don't believe we should be unified.
Is there a problem with that, Rob?
Well, I think we have to think about what does unify us and what's the state involvement in that unity. And I think we share a political space. So we will make decisions going forward together where on the basis of everybody having an equal say, and we will discuss and debate what are the right decisions that we can make collectively as a nation, and that should form our national identity. My worry is that given some of what government is trying to express in its latest strategy, that there is a fixed view of what it is to be British. And I don't think that's helpful for us as a nation. We need to understand what it is that we're going to achieve going forward together.
Rob, could I ask you, what do you believe is the fixed view of British identity?
I think in the government strategy there is a suggestion that there are a set of British values that are written in stone that people from minority communities do not accept or understand. I'm very wary of going down that road. I'd rather we had a position where all voices were heard, all different opinions and different backgrounds had an equal say in forming our democracy and our democratic processes.
Are you worried about those implications, Stephen?
Well, I am, because, Varane will probably have this with his students, with the kind of classic multicultural story. If you have a group of people that like to go to bed at 10 o'clock at night in quietude and peace, and a small minority of 5% like to have, because of their culture, loud music at 10 o'clock at night, then under multiculturalist terms that we've heard so far is that they should be all equal together. We should all work together. The small group and the large group should come together and find a way forward. But what we find in this country, in the UK at the moment, particularly over the last 20 years, is that the majority always has to accept the minority's argument. So in this case, the majority who want to go to bed at night and sleep quietly will have to listen to the tribe's music at 10 o'clock because that's multiculturalism. I don't accept that as really a valid argument for multiculturalism. If we're going to work together, people leave their countries and come to another country because of what it offers. And what it offers also embodies part of their historical cultures, and they should try, if they can, to blend in with that, whilst we try and take some of the benefits of what they bring.
Dr. Oberoi, do you think there's a trouble with Stephen's view that we're asking immigrants to come over and then assimilate into society?
I think the perspective that immigrants should assimilate only has any real moral validity when we're talking about morally repugnant practices such as, female genital mutilation or something like that, honour killings. At that level, I think no one would say that assimilation was wrong, or I think very few people would, at least. Beyond that, I'm surprised to hear that in scenarios like the one that he painted, that there shouldn't be a process of discussion and negotiation. I'm also surprised to hear the UKIP representative talking about a tribe. I suspect most people. I suspect that most people would suggest that in any communal situation where there is a chance of disagreement, discussion and negotiation is often the way to proceed. The idea that different groups have practices that are completely unintelligible to other groups and are beyond negotiation would be strange, I think, for most people. Negotiation is possible. I'm not sure why the UKIP representative would oppose that. But beyond that, I share Rob's view that values and so-called British values are discussed too much. In the sense that I'm never sure exactly what values are. If values are things that we value, things that we attach importance to, there are many things that we attach importance to. I attach importance to cold beer, for example, but no one would say that that was a value. If these shared values are something else, something more deeper, such as, justice, freedom, equality, then I would say fine, but I don't know who would disagree with that. I don't know of any group that would say, minority or majority, no, I'm opposed to justice, I'm opposed to equality. I'm not sure what these debates about shared values really mean. They seem, at some level at least, to be incoherent. I agree that Britishness as Britain's identity, such as the structures, the institutions, the norms, the sensibilities that collectively comprise Britain are important. I accept that people's British identities are also important. I just don't know about this debate about British values. It seems very strange to me.
What would you say the British values were? There seems to be, the focal point of the first part of this discussion is trying to find what British values are. If I could, I'll go round all three of you. What would you say British values are? What is it that the government wants us all to unite around?
If we want to talk about Britain's identity, that is incredibly important. It can encourage a sense of pride, a sense of loyalty, but it can also encourage a sense of shame. People's British identities can be a shared identity despite differences between religion, region, class, occupation and so on. They can be a uniting force. But we have to ask, what sorts of British identities do we want? That goes back to what sort of education we want to impart to children through history teaching. That goes back to bigger questions like, what sort of country do we want to be? Do we want to be a country trapped by our past, perhaps trapped by ideas of empire, trapped through ideas of Englishness, or do we want to be more than that? rather like Rob, I think that we have to have these discussions, these negotiations, and I think these sorts of, like what we're doing today, these sorts of discussions on radio and so on are very helpful to that.
A reminder that you're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion. Joining me to discuss the future of multiculturalism is Dr. Varun Oberoi, a lecturer in the Department of Politics and History at Brunel University, Stephen Wolfe from the United Kingdom Independence Party, and Rob Barkley from the race equality think tank, the Runnymede Trust. Stephen Wolfe from UKIP. Is it a lot simpler? Are there more fundamental basic values that Britons can unite around?
Yes, the rule of law, parliamentary sovereignty, Judo-Christian background, the Queen as the head, and then move on from there some of our cultural aspects of whether we're talking about people rolling cheese down hillsides or actually having November the 5th or actually burning on Guy Fawkes, because these represent the very hard-won freedoms that we had in this country. There has long been a history where people in this country have had to die, whether you talk about the 11 killed at Merthyr Tydfil simply because they wanted to ask for the vote, whether those in my hometown of Manchester who had 24 shot and killed and hundreds others injured in Manchester because they wanted the vote, or indeed here where women were beaten simply because they wanted to have the vote. These are part of the historical elements that form part of the culture and therefore sit down as the values that we have. And what you find, and unfortunately, I wasn't trying to say there isn't a time or a purpose to negotiate. My analogy, Varun, was really to show that in many occasions, if you ask the taxi driver that was driving me here, who was extremely upset about multiculturalism, is that there is a feeling in this country, and I'm not sure whether you believe in this or even agree with it, but there is certainly a feeling about those that have lived here, born here, paid their taxes, that there is an ability for you to be able to come from a different country, settle here and have your values usurp those of the historical elements. Now, I think if you try and deny that feeling exists, or even deny that some of those particular instances have occurred, one's not living in the real world and not actually seeing what's happening around the countries. There is a great unfortunate thing that we have those who live in London live in their own little bubble. It's an international multicultural city. But get out to the rest of the country, and whether you're looking at Bradford, for example, whether you're looking at Sheffield or Newcastle or Hull or all over the countries, you'll see the real change that's happening in those cities, and often not for the better, unfortunately. As much as I would like to agree that some of it works, Rob, in other parts of the country it's not, and you just need to get there and see it.
And I like Stephen, I think we're not in a perfect position. And I do understand that people often feel as if other people have arrived and their voices are heard over the voice of those people who have an equally legitimate claim to a space in that discussion and debate. My worry is that we don't have enough spaces for discussion and debate, and it means that we end up trying to racialise the problem, and it drives wedges within our society which aren't all that helpful. I would agree with you about the rule of law, parliamentary sovereignty, etc. And even rolling cheeses down hills. I mean, I think that's all fine. All of those parts of our history have formed where we are today.
Yeah, I agree with that. You see, my problem with multiculturalism is it diminishes critical thought by distorting global history or indeed our own history, by putting underlying aspects. One, for example, is raised here today, was the idea that we're all Little Britons or looking back at colonial history. When my father and grandmother came over from America as a black and Ireland, they used to go to Manchester and were not allowed into pubs or even bed and breakfast because there used to be signs that said no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. Now, thankfully, for people like myself who suffered forms of racism and abuse when I was growing up, that part of the history has gone. And we have accepted that whether you're Jewish, whether you're black, whether you're Asian, you have an ability to get a job, work hard, get to the right and the top if you've got the right education aspects. What multiculturalism is doing in one thing is alienating those who have tried and opened their arms at first by giving advantages to minority groups without the discussion and negotiation in proper format. And secondly, and here is a different argument that's moving forward, I'm afraid, and I've seen it for myself, there are many who are just not good enough at their jobs, are good enough to be able to achieve the top roles, who are using the nasty argument of racism or homophobia to say that I'm not getting on because of those arguments. And I'm afraid what they try to do and dement the argument of culturalism and integration is by using these shibboleths as saying it's the reason I've not gone on is because of that. And all that does is alienate other aspects of the community.
What do we deal with people that come to this country, come to the UK, but aren't willing to integrate? It's all very well we have these negotiations, which might very well work on these British principles that we've all outlined so far. I've got a quote from the paper, from the government paper, which says there are too many people still left outside or choosing to remain outside mainstream society. What do we do with those people, Dr. Oberoi?
Well, if you want citizenship, you now have to pass a citizenship test about life in the United Kingdom, and that I assume is the level of integration that is desirable. If you want something beyond that, perhaps the level of cultural assimilation, whereby you internalise the culture of the majority, then I would say that a case needs to be made for why that's important. Can we not do without it? Why precisely is that required? And is it not deeply illiberal to ask people to jettison their existing culture, acquire another one, and all that goes with it? After all, cultures give people's lives meaning. They are modes of thought, modes of belief. If you ask people to get rid of that and acquire a wholly new culture, that really is a very big step, and perhaps even a grossly illiberal step. I wouldn't say a level of integration beyond what is required currently in the law is absolutely necessary, and I would need to see the case made for it. When the government says there are people, as you say from your quote, who are outside of the mainstream, I don't know what the mainstream is exactly, and I hate to be too specific, but would anybody around the table necessarily be able to say, I am in the mainstream? It requires some sort of conception of the mainstream, know exactly where it is, why it is there, and where your place in it. I don't know what these things mean. I know that the government says these things.
Stephen Wall from UKIP, what do we do with the people that are, I quote, choosing to remain outside mainstream society?
Well, we must try and encourage them to actually engage with the United Kingdom and its culture and its values, and work with us to actually see that they can get value about living in this country. One of the things that I've tried to talk about here is that where people allow themselves, through their own choice or through government policies that prevent them from escaping, end up in ghettoisation. So you have parts, and there are, and I'm sure both Rob will, in his studies and research, will show there are huge chunks of areas in the country where there are this ghettoisation, where people don't speak English, don't engage themselves, therefore, unfortunately, in the schools, and therefore we can't educate them in the way that they should do to give them the tools to be able to get out and get into the framework. So I think we have to use education as a very key front on that. I'm not a great fan of this idea that simply passing a test makes you culturally acceptable in a country, or indeed that it might help towards providing you citizenship and a passport, but there's a whole lot more that goes with having a passport. It's actually believing some of those fundamental points that we talked about, whether it's the rule of law, parliamentary sovereignty, the Queen as the head, the Church of England as actually, and I talk as a Catholic too, Rob, here the Church of England is the lead church in this country. And where there are some differences, perhaps for Anne, is this. Some people outside of the mainstream, and you will probably have better research on it than perhaps myself, would talk about radical Muslims, where they believe that they should have Sharia law as a principal law rather than the rule of law in the United Kingdom. There are variants between where that stems. There are those in this country who don't believe that, and there are those that do. And trying to some small aspects there that people see on their day-to-day lives, and why they say that they're outside of what they think is the mainstream. I'm certainly in the mainstream. You're a lecturer in a university. I think you're therefore definitely in the mainstream. You're a part of the elite of this country.
I don't know what the mainstream is. If I just take on the core issues they're saying, I mean, I think most people would say, of course, everyone needs to be able to speak English. They can't be economically active if they can't speak English.
And I think there is a real willingness to learn English. We can over-egg this notion that people are living in ghettos and segregated. People tend to move to an area by the second generation living in that area, they're moving out of that area, and they move to that area for social support initially.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. My thanks to Rob Barkley, the director of the Runnymede Trust, a race equality think tank, Dr. Varun Oberoi, a lecturer at the Department of Politics and History at Brunel University, and Stephen Wall from the United Kingdom Independence Party.